I swear to you, some days being a Dolphins fan feels like an endurance test. But today is one of those days that might actually turn into a pivot point. Because there's a decision that looks small, but it shakes the whole locker room. There's a sentence that slipped out by accident and now nobody can unhear it. And there's a detail from the game that, once you catch it, makes you want to rewind and yell at the TV. You're not gonna believe what we've got today. So settle in, hit that like, and let's get straight into it. The real question is, who's actually running this offense right now? The stadium was freezing, the scoreboard screaming 28-3, and somehow there was still that tiny thread of hope only a Dolphins fan understands. But then came the detail that left a lot of people stunned. It wasn't just the 28-15 loss in Pittsburgh, it was how it ended. And that's not just me talking. Troy Aikman, live on the broadcast, literally paused and basically asked, "What is Miami trying to do?" He was baffled by the fourth quarter, especially the lack of urgency and the messy philosophy at the end. Think about it. Miami finally shows some life and cuts into the lead, but the offense burns almost 5 minutes just to find that second touchdown in the fourth quarter. 5 minutes when you're chasing the clock is an eternity in the NFL, and that's what makes it so frustrating. It didn't look like a lack of talent, it looked like a lack of a plan. After the onside kick didn't work, the Dolphins still burned all 3 timeouts trying to steal one last chance, but that's where the criticism really lands. Why slow the pace earlier and then suddenly panic later? Aikman straight up called that fourth quarter ridiculous and said it was hard to understand the philosophy. And to me, that's what hurts the most. When a veteran voice like that says it doesn't make sense, he's poking at 2 open wounds at once: clock management and defensive identity. There was even a play with 42 seconds left where Miami took a delay of game. A delay of game on the final push. That's the kind of thing rivals feast on. It turns into memes. It fuels ugly debates all week long. And here's the context that explains why the comeback was basically impossible. Miami had just 89 total yards through 3 quarters. There were ugly drives, 3 and outs, sacks, an interception, and a passing game that was not up to standard, McDaniel's own words. When you give away 3 quarters like that, the fourth quarter becomes desperation, not strategy. So here's the question I'm putting on the table. Was this just one bad night, or is it a sign that when the game tightens up, this team still doesn't know who it is? And stay with me, because what comes next goes straight at who's in charge of this offense. Alright, take a breath with me, because this isn't just news, it's a message. And the scariest part is it didn't come from a leaked report or some locker room whisper. It came right at the microphones, calm and calculated, like the decision had been cooking for a while. After a night where the offense vanished for 3 full quarters, the question nobody wanted to say out loud started hanging in the air. If the season is already slipping away, what's the next logical step? Limits get tested, hierarchies get challenged, and most of all, you poke the spot that's usually untouchable when you're sitting at 6-8, out of the playoff picture, and the performance doesn't match the investment. Patience runs out fast. The box score tries to lie to you. Tua finished 22 of 28, 253 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. But anyone who actually watched knows those numbers come with makeup. A lot of that production showed up late, when the game was already bleeding out. That familiar here we go feeling when the other team is managing the clock and you're chasing damage. And then come the red flags fans are split on. For sacks, another costly interception. And worse than that, an offense with no rhythm, no answers, and none of that urgency we just talked about. That's where the suspense turns into a punch. Mike McDaniel said that everything is on the table when it comes to how he approaches the final 3 games. In fan language, nobody's seat is guaranteed, not even the $212 million quarterback. And when a head coach says that out loud, it's not filler, it's a warning, it's pressure. It's him telling the locker room the shield is gone. Now it's about performance. What does that change on the field? Everything. If Miami really starts evaluating options, the talk about Zach Wilson or Quinn Ewers stops being noise and turns into a real rotation conversation. And that gives McDaniel two things: a live test of his system with a different QB profile and a loud message to the entire roster about accountability. But it also opens a massive risk. If he changes things and it gets worse, it's full-blown crisis. If he changes things and it looks better, the question explodes all off-season. So will the fan base splits between give him more time and enough is enough? There's this tension hanging over the team. If even the head coach cracked that door open, does it ever really close again? And hold tight, because the third story today takes that same sentence and turns it into an even clearer signal of what's happening behind the scenes. Get ready, because this one leaves no room for interpretation. When a coach speaks one way, reporters might spin it another, but when the entire league hears the same thing, that's a sign. McDaniel's quote spread like wildfire, and what started as post-game frustration turned into a serious backroom debate. Was that just venting, or was it the start of a real shift? Coaches don't like putting their QB on blast, especially in public. When they do, there's usually a reason, and that reason might be bigger than we want to admit. What really trips people up is the stat line defense. Fans point to it and say, look, 22 completions, 253 yards, 2 scores, 1 pick. But that's a cold read that doesn't tell the story. Most of that volume came after Miami was already down 28-3, playing catch-up, racing the clock. That's where the evaluation gets heavier. If the production only shows up when the game is already slipping away, it doesn't solve the real problem, leading when the game is still alive. That's what drives fans crazy. It's not just mistakes, it's when they happen, and that's why the quote now feels like a ghost haunting the locker room. The quarterback play wasn't good enough. So for me, everything is on the table. That's a message aimed at 3 groups at once. At Tua, saying the comfort zone is over. At the roster, saying nobody's protected. And at the front office and fans, saying there will be consequences. Analysts around the league picked up on how rare that is, because coaches usually avoid publicly opening the QB door unless they're seriously thinking about walking through it. With Miami out of the playoff race, the logic turns cold and simple. The last games become a lab, and a real lab tests the thing nobody wants tested. If McDaniel puts Zach Wilson or Quinn Ewers on the field, it's not just about chasing a spark. It's about collecting answers, putting decisions on tape, measuring leadership, seeing who can execute the basics under pressure. And that's where the argument that splits every Dolphins group chat starts. If another QB steps in and the offense looks more alive, how do you go back to Tua? And if it completely collapses, how do you avoid looking like a team without direction? And while we're all losing our minds over that, the final piece today ties it together. What all of this means for the future of the Dolphins, and which version of this team we actually want to see take shape. That's the day right there. One of those days that splits the fan base down the middle and somehow might still pull everyone toward the same goal. First punch was watching even national broadcasters struggle to understand the lack of urgency and confusion late, like Miami woke up way too late. Second was McDaniel's bombshell. When he says everything is on the table, he's not just venting, he's threatening the hierarchy. Third is the domino effect. Testing another QB changes the present and could rewrite the entire offseason. So I'll ask you straight, do you ride with Tua to the end, or do you start testing the future right now? Hit the like, subscribe, and say it with your chest in the comments.